I have this deeply held belief that I've shared here before, that if you find a book that you love from a small publisher, chances are that you will love many of the other books that they publish. And what's more, if you do end up reading multiple books published by a small publisher, especially if that small publisher has a really strong vision or vibe guiding what they put out into the world, then you will appreciate all of the books that you read from that publisher more than if you had just read the one. You will get to know the personality of the publisher, and you will be able to see how each of those books is in conversation with each other. In my opinion, no publisher illustrates this better than Dorothy, a publishing project. Dorothy published not only my favorite book on the recent shortlist of the Republic of Consciousness Prize for the US and Canada, but also my favorite book of the year that I've read so far. Possibly my favorite book that I've read in the past couple years, maybe even one of my favorite books of all time, which is saying a whole lot because I don't generally have a list of favorite books. And I will tell you more about that specific book in a moment. But first, I want to talk about Dorothy. So the Republic of Consciousness Prize is a literary prize that celebrates small publishers. There is a UK branch and a US and Canada branch to the prize, and the winner of the US and Canada prize is going to be announced very, very soon. So I want to talk a little bit about some of these publishers that are on the shortlist, because that is the spirit of the Republic of Consciousness Prize. It's not just about these individual amazing books, it's about celebrating small publishers who are putting out works of high literary merit. So from the shortlist, I absolutely have to talk about Dorothy, a publishing project. So you'll notice something special about Dorothy within the full name of the publisher. It's called Dorothy, a publishing project. The word project is in the name of the press because with each book Dorothy publishes, they are building something. Most years, Dorothy only publishes 2 books, and those 2 books are published on the same day. And with every additional 2 books every year, Dorothy is adding to its project. It's adding to the conversation that all of its books are having together. So let's read the About section from Dorothy's website together. Dorothy, a publishing project, is an award-winning feminist press dedicated to works of fiction or near fiction or writing about fiction. Each fall, we publish 2 new books simultaneously. We work to pair books that draw upon different aesthetic traditions, because a large part of our interest in literature lies in its possibilities, its endless stylistic and formal variety. The press is named for the editor's paternal great-aunt Dorothy Traver. Dorothy was a librarian, rose gardener, animal lover, children's book author, and bookmobile driver who regularly gifted her niece children's books stamped with an owl book plate. Dorothy was established in 2009 when co-founder Danielle Dutton got wind of a trilogy that the writer Renee Gladman was hoping or planning to publish. Danielle Dutton was kind of hoping to start something of her own in the publishing world. This is what I've gleaned from interviews with her. She reached out to Renee Gladman and said, "If you let me publish your trilogy, then I will start a publisher. I'll start a publishing venture." So apparently Renee Gladman agreed. And at the same time, Danielle Dutton sought out the rights to publish a book from a long out of print book from Barbara Comins. Those were the first 2 books that Dorothy published. So they published in the first year. They published Event Factory by Renee Gladman, and they published, I'm going to look at the title here, Who Was Changed and Who Was Dead by Barbara Comins. I read through a ton of interviews with Danielle Dutton and Martin Riker, who are not only the co-founders of Dorothy, but also they're married. I found a lot of common themes popping up in those interviews. First of all, it is their goal to stay small. And so they will continue to publish only 2, sometimes a couple more. Like for example, I think this coming fall, they'll be publishing 3 books. But for the most part, publishing 2 books per year. And this will help them focus on what is the most important to them, which is the quality of the books and being able to spend time themselves with each and every book that they put out into the world. Over and over and over in these interviews, the interviewers mention the physical quality of the books. And that is something, even before I read these interviews, that is something that I noticed myself. They physically feel so special to hold. They're a velvet laminate cover, which is just such a great texture, but also they're really deliciously floppy and like they're just really, really pleasant to hold. And it feels like you are holding a really special object. A lot of the interviews also bring up the focus on mostly women authors. And Danielle Dutton shared, interestingly, that when she worked in prior publishing jobs, she saw how few women were submitting works compared to men. And she thought this was a shame, of course. And also she saw from the inside, from an insider's perspective, how men in the publishing industry spoke about the work of women, and it wasn't good, basically. And so when she started her own press, she decided that she was going to focus primarily on feminist works by women. And also, time and time again in these interviews, the idea of a project comes up. The idea that they are doing more than just publishing a list of books every year. Their goal is for you, the reader, me, the reader, to encounter more than one of their books. So initially they would, I'm not sure if they do this anymore, but when they would publish the 2 books each year, if you bought both of them, you would get a discount so that you were encouraged to buy both of them. So you could see how those 2 books were in conversation with each other. They also used to, on their website, they don't do this anymore, but you could buy their all of the books they published, just the whole lot. When I saw that, I was kind of saving up with the idea that maybe one day I would do that, but they've transitioned their distribution to New York Review Books, and so New York Review Books handles all the distribution for Dorothy, and so I think that whole idea of being able to buy all of the books they published went by the wayside. But the point is, Dorothy wants you to encounter more than one of their books. And so something that they do that's very unique and special is they keep all of their backlist titles in print. And they've actually shared in interviews that this is their greatest expense, is keeping every single one of their backlist titles in print, so readers can buy as many Dorothy books as possible. They've also described in interviews this idea that with every 2 books that are added to their project, it's like slowly revealing the personality of Dorothy over time, like slowly unveiling the true, full personality of Dorothy as a publisher. And to that point, in an interview with the Community of Literary Magazines and Presses, or CLMP, they said, in addition to the stories that each of these books are telling, there's the meta story of Dorothy. And that story, the revelation of Dorothy's personality, is enormously important to us. In another interview with Volume 1 Brooklyn, Danielle Dutton describes the vibe of Dorothy as homespun and earnest. And she says, it wasn't her goal to be a publisher that is slick or hip. Not that I even could be hip or slick, she says, but I consciously wanted to avoid giving anyone the misimpression that I or the press might be hip or slick. This quote for me illustrates the beauty and excitement of exploring the world of small publishers. So many small presses have a personality, and I totally agree with her that the Dorothy books feel homespun and earnest and really smart, but in an approachable way. Thinking back to the full Republic of Consciousness long list from this year, I think the one publisher that stands out as being hip, the most hip maybe of the group would be $2 Radio. I think everything from their name to their covers to the kind of books they publish just exudes this sense of hipness. So I would say, just among the long list of the Republic of Consciousness Prize, there are so many different personalities represented from the publishers. Because of Dorothy's project-like nature, I have a deep desire to collect all of their books. I think a lot of us book lovers are just collectors by nature. And so when you know that a publisher intends for you to encounter as many of their books as possible, it's super hard to resist that. And they make them so beautifully, you know, uniform and go so nicely together. So this is my, so far, pretty tiny Dorothy library. I have The New Animals by Pip Adam, which was also just published this past year and I read last year and loved very much. I also have A Horse at Night on Writing by Amina Kane, and I can't wait to read this. I have not yet read it. I also last year got from the library and read the collection, the story collection from Cristina Rivera Garza, which, let me get the name of it here. It's New and Selected Stories by Cristina Rivera Garza. It's mostly translated by Sarah Booker, but there are a bunch of other translators that contributed to that as well. That was a wild and fascinating collection of short stories. And then that, of course, brings me to The Long Form by Kate Briggs. This was one of the books that Dorothy published last year along with The New Animals, and it is the book that was shortlisted now for the Republic of Consciousness Prize and is by far, not by far, it's my favorite of the list. I loved the whole shortlist, but this is my favorite. So let's talk about it. I've already talked about this book quite a bit on my channel, but I think I can share more because there's a lot here to digest. The Long Form is a story of a mother, Helen, and her newborn baby, Rose. And it takes place over the course of one single day. And the primary action represented in this novel, pretty long novel, is of Helen trying to get Rose to fall asleep. Meanwhile, while Helen is trying to get Rose to fall asleep, a delivery arrives on Helen's doorstep. And that delivery is a used copy of Henry Fielding's Tom Jones. Helen had purchased a copy online for under £2. I forget exactly how much it was, but it was under £2. And so, of course, having loved this book so much, I wanted to experience that. I don't know. I just thought I should buy a used copy of Tom Jones. And so I went on and I found the cheapest copy I could find, cheapest used copy I could find in quick order, and it was like $2.50. It turned out to be like $2.50 from Powell's. I ordered it online from Powell's and it arrived, and yeah, it did not arrive while I was trying to get a baby to go to sleep, thank goodness. And so what happens over the course of the long form is Helen moves from interacting with Rose, not just trying to get her to go to sleep, but interacting, caring for Rose, and reading from Tom Jones. And I have not read Tom Jones. You do not have to have read it to fully appreciate the long form, I believe. I feel like it pretty much lays out most of the plot of Tom Jones for you. So you don't have to have read Tom Jones. But there are also essay-like sections throughout the novel that are about the novel, are about the art form of the novel. And in fact, the title references a lecture given by Roland Barthes called, what was it called? What's the lecture called? The Preparation of the Novel. And lo and behold, Kate Briggs, who is a translator, has translated this lecture and published it, I think through Columbia University Press, translated and published this lecture from Roland Barthes that refers to the novel as the long form or the longest form. There is an amazing interview on the podcast Between the Covers with David Naiman, where he interviews Kate Briggs, and they talk about this concept of the novel being the longest form and kind of what does that mean? What does that do to the art form of the novel? The fact that it's something that is consumed over a longer period of time than a lot of other art forms. And one of the things that David Naiman does on his podcast is he invites other people to ask questions of the author. So he invited Danielle Dutton, co-founder of Dorothy, to ask a question for Kate Briggs to answer. And in Danielle Dutton's question, she reveals that the long form is actually the longest novel that Dorothy had ever published. And so Dutton's question to Briggs is about something she called durationality and kind of the purpose behind the length of this novel. Why did Briggs feel it was important for this novel to be a lengthy one? And Briggs replied, and I'm going to read right from the quote here, "A longer novel is going to be set down and returned to. And that was really important to me because the novel is enacting this relation between a mother and her newborn. And they're each continuously refreshing their relation to each other. I mean, Helen, as the adult, is quite literally setting the baby down, moving a small, different distance away and returning to her. But the baby, too, Rose, is also getting distracted and engaging with other things and then renewing her relationship or her attention, the direction of her attention toward her mother." And then she goes on to say, a longer novel meant interruption. It meant leaving. The novel is the art form that seems to accommodate and withstand interruption. So what is this art form that seems to understand that it will be cut and withdrawn from in order to be returned to? So just as Helen is setting Rose down, not forgetting about Rose, hopefully, setting her down, returning to her at a later point, a long novel is something that you set down. And that was something that she kind of wanted to recreate throughout the narrative of Helen and Rose's relationship as well. The same give and take, the same interruption that you experience with a novel itself. And you compare that to other forms of writing, like a poem or a short story or a novella or an essay, that are more meant to be consumed within one sitting. But a novel has to have that endurance, that quality of durationality, that you can put it down and it can be interrupted and you can return to it. Another thing that Briggs points out in this interview is that when her partner read the book, it took him about 12 hours to read the book, which is almost exactly the amount of time that we spend with Helen and Rose from their morning until night. We spend 12 hours with them throughout the book, and it takes about 12 hours to read the book if you are the partner of Kate Briggs. I didn't time myself. I should have timed myself to see how long it took me. She also shared that she felt like the length of the book needed to exhaust the reader a little bit so that it kind of mirrored the exhaustion that Helen was feeling with Rose. And who knows, Rose was probably feeling with Helen too. One of the great things about this novel is that you do get a little bit of the point of view of the baby, Rose, and it's not in a weird way. It feels natural and beautiful, and it really illustrated the points when you get a bit of Rose's perspective, really illustrated the incredible amount of intellect and development that's occurring for a baby, like the amount of brain activity that has to happen in order to be a baby, to interact with the world. Everything is new. You're figuring everything around you out. And she just illustrated that so beautifully in the novel. So that is Dorothy, a publishing project, and that is the long form by Kate Briggs. If you haven't checked out books from Dorothy, or especially the long form, I obviously highly recommend it. And I even more recommend that you also check out The New Animals by Pip Adam, which is a completely different novel, completely different. But it's so cool to be able to say, yeah, I've read these two books from Dorothy, the two books that Dorothy published last year. I've read them. I read them together. I didn't read them together, like back to back, but I've read both of them, and that just feels right. It feels complete. And now I want to complete all of Dorothy's books so that I can say I've done it. Anyway, I can't wait to see who the winner is of the Republic of Consciousness Prize for the US and Canada. If you haven't yet encountered this prize, I have several other videos where I talk about the long list, so please check those out because it is a literary prize like no other. Amazing books. It's really cool to read through all of them and see how those books are kind of in conversation with one another. I really loved that I was able to read the full long list because, again, you can kind of see a lot of the same themes popping up. There was a lot about art in those books, a lot about climate change, a lot about colonialism, and just it's a great, I don't even know. It's a great, just read the books. Read the books. My name is Sarah, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you so much for being here with me today. Bye.